a brief introduction about who BotLab is. BotLab is a technology firm. We offer technology-based trainings in different realms for different audiences. We also offer data protection audits, as well as data science as a service for different organizations with a specialization in customer analytics. So let's start. So maybe I can give an introduction to who Mercy Mutemi is. Mercy Mutemi is a legislative drafter, mediator, and litigator. She's currently a partner at Nzi and Sumbi Advocates. She's a contemporary lawyer based in Nairobi, Kitui, and Makueni counties. Her work ethic is about commitment to do things differently by adopting inclusive approaches to offer unique solutions, and the patience and humility to pursue wholesome strategies, changing tact from adversarial legal practice to dialogue aimed at achieving amicable solutions. These three strategies influence her style of work, regardless of any assignment at hand. Her key focus area are internet law and policy, intellectual property, and legislative intervention. And then I'll introduce Rosemary Koech. She's currently the head of public policy at Oxygen. Rosaline is a professional whose practice focuses on public policy, where she gives strategic advice to various industries on the impact of legal and regulatory affairs of their businesses. In this dynamic field, there is constant need to try and make sense of how various industries can have a healthy information with various policy stakeholders and the existing legal frameworks. She's given advice on corporate governance, corporate structure, policy development, anti-money laundering, and risk management, intellectual property, and engagement with regulators, as well as research relating to the deployment of products and services in various markets. She has previously worked as the head of legal at Wire and also worked with Mode, Caritas Nairobi, bakery, confectionery, food manufacturing, and Allied Workers Union. She holds a degree from a law degree from University of Nairobi, postgraduate diploma from Kenya School of Law, and is a member of the Law Society of Kenya and an associate of Kictonet. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, hi, Ellie. Ellie is, we co-host this session with Ellie. Ellie's, she works for Oracle. She's a strategic business development manager for East and West Africa. Yes, we co-host the data science series jointly. So we would like to start with the questions. It's gonna be a panel, so feel free to post questions within the Q&A section and the chat section. So Mercy, why is privacy important to the consumer? You can also give scenarios and case studies of how people or businesses have been affected recently.
Hi, Mercy. Hi, Ellie. And thank you for having me, everyone. I think when you talk about privacy, there's always the temptation to define it from a harm perspective. So look to cases where something bad has happened for you to make a case as to how important privacy is. And I think there's a fault in that kind of approach, because when you dig down at the basis of, at the foundation of privacy is you're dealing with people, you're dealing with human beings, you're dealing with people, and people come with them attached. With them is attached, and like an inherent right to dignity and an inherent right to privacy. So even when you're talking about privacy from a business perspective, it always comes down to people. So without even looking for the harm that consumers could fall into, or what loss someone could suffer, the fact that you're dealing with human beings automatically sparks conversations on the right to privacy, because that's a right that is inherent. That's a right that just doesn't go away because you're in a business transaction or business context. From a consumer's perspective, I mean, there have been many cases, and I think for us the saddest part is we don't have strong jurisprudence, coming from our courts on the right to privacy. We have a lot of complaints that go maybe to the administrative level, so they would be raised with the communication authority, with maybe the consumer protection, or even those on Twitter. There'd be many complaints raised, for example, on misappropriation of personal information, or direct marketing, how a direct marketer is getting our information. But rarely do you see success or even people following through to the court process. The first case, I think, that has gone to court, and we have to really sit and wait and see how this is going to go, is a case that was brought last year against Safaricom, where I think the petitioner alleges there was like a breach inside Safaricom, and his data was sold to betting companies, was given to betting companies. So it's going to be really interesting in the next, say, 2 to 3 years to see what the courts are going to turn their attention to when they're looking at privacy conversations. But I think for me, what I want to really emphasize on is to steer away from a harm-based definition of why privacy is important. Accept that privacy is important because it is, these are people you're dealing with, and people come with them. Like with them already, they have the right to privacy. And no matter what the company stands to lose or stands to gain, then you have to protect that privacy. That constitutionalism, I think, is a higher cost than even a business cost. If someone were to sue for violation of privacy from a constitutional point of view, it would be more punitive to a company than if it was a breach of contract kind of case or just a consumer protection case. Yes.
Rosemary, maybe we can give a brief of what the data protection law is about in Kenya, because I believe there's some people who maybe need a summary, an executive summary, to understand about data protection.
Sorry, I was muted. So basically, data protection, right from the historical perspective, is a human rights law, which is why Mercy started by saying we need to move away from a harm perspective. We need to move to trying to understand it from where it should be something almost intrinsic. So when it came from that kind of perspective, there was, of course, most recently, the General Data Protection Regulations in the EU and international compliance ensued. And then now Kenya also had now its draft data protection law that was released last year, debated, and in November last year, the Data Protection Act was promulgated and was signed into law. So basically, what is the Data Protection Act? It gives a determination of who the players are when you're working with somebody's data. And basically, it's about how do you manage data? How do you handle it? What rights are there for users in terms of data protection? Yeah, so how do you handle data from in accordance with the human rights to privacy, in a lawful and transparent manner, using data for specified purposes, making sure that whatever you collect is, the kind of data that you collect is adequate and relevant you get. Such that from a business perspective, and I'm sure many of us are business owners or even handle affairs of data privacy in one way or another, it's about asking yourself, when I have somebody's data, what steps should I take in a day-to-day basis to make sure that it is aligned with the data protection law? Of course, sharing only with consent, and of course not transferring outside Kenya without adequate protection. So yeah, that's basically almost like an outline. But of course, the law also has fines. There are fines that have been set out. So in as much as we're saying it's we should not take it from a harm perspective, there's also the reality that there are data protection offenses under the Data Protection Act, offenses of unlawful processing, processing without consent, unlawful disclosure to third parties, unlawful access of data, and then of course 3 million shillings fine or a 10-year jail term or whichever or both and then forfeiture of equipment, and finally, prohibition orders which can be given. So basically, that's a general outline of why the law, what it is, and then of course, the law also mentions who a data subject is, who a data controller is. So there's quite a number of definitions, and of course, it puts together the requirement for businesses to have, say, a data protection officer. That doesn't have to be resident in your business, but you need to have compliance from a data protection perspective, data protection audits. And yeah, then of course, there's a new office which will be created, the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, who will be having an oversight over how data is being handled by different people. And that's who you can complain to. So that's basically an outline without having to be very legalistic in terms of section this, section that, and hopefully didn't lose my audience in a lot of legal jargon, just trying to make it as practical as possible. But each of those can be a 10-minute conversation on their own. So if there are any questions, let's put those in the chat.
Okay. How would you say, how relevant is the Data Protection Act guidelines for small businesses as well as organizations that are medium-sized?
So it's quite relevant because you see right now it's a legal requirement. So it's not, you can't bury your head in the sand and say, oh, I'm not, as a business, I should not care. There are gonna be further legal implications. So it's quite relevant. But I think the most important factor, and I think I've written this down, we need to have an appreciation of why this is there and actually make it part and parcel of your day-to-day operations. In how the kind of customers you handle, the kind of data you're handling. Today's session is about remote working and work from home. What have we done to make sure that the data that we handle is protected from whichever place people are working? So that it's quite relevant. It cannot be again. You can't even speak about it enough.
Okay. Are there
maybe some thoughts on this?
Mercy, maybe you can give us any case studies that you have seen for small businesses on how some of them maybe have complied or some of them that are having issues with compliance. Like you had pointed out, the mass spamming of subscribers. So are there any other case studies that maybe you could give us on how people, small businesses or medium-sized businesses are either breaching this or, yeah.
Let me start by saying this. Litigation is very expensive for SMEs. As an SME, you are not Facebook, you are not Twitter, you are not Google. Locally, you're not even the level of Safaricom. These are corporations that have a dedicated budget for litigation. They can survive several litigations, like back to back. SMEs cannot survive litigation. And that is why compliance is so important for SMEs. When the GDPR came into force, we saw a very dedicated push by SMEs to comply. And that was a really good thing because SMEs are looking to break barriers, to break frontiers, to do business with a larger audience. So in their minds, they were sure they were going to interact with data subjects in the EU. So that thought of, we need to start complying with data protection principles, even if this is just the GDPR, was very important. So much so that now that we have the Kenyan data protection, you don't have to, start from the ground up. You already have some level of data protection culture in your organization. I'll tell you what, the principles of data protection don't change, and they have punished SMEs long before the conversation on data protection became popular. And I'll just give one case study. This really has no direct connection to the Data Protection Act, but it's a right to privacy case. So if you look at the case of Roshanara in Kenya law, it sort of has become our go-to case on right to privacy. If you look at Roshanara's case, and this is a case study on Ashley Beauties when it was at its prime, and that's, everybody was, rooting for Ashley's. I mean, having been fined like even 1 million shillings in as punishment for, breaking, violating the right to privacy of one of your associates, that doesn't come cheap to an SME. Not even that, you have to think of the litigation fees. And then where we are at now in the digital environment is your data practices either give you a niche or demote you when it comes to marketability. If you're going to become famous for breaching privacy, then it's going to become very problematic to break into new frontiers. Let me give an example. When you talk about Tala and the money, the financial products that have come up in Kenya, and there are many, and on one end, that's like a very good thing for us to encourage innovation in that direction. I wanted to see how even policy makers can look at SMEs in a bad light, such that you would be the first to go if anything were to happen in the negative. So, for example, now we're in the middle of a pandemic. If you look at the guidelines that the central bank issued with regard to, with regard to how those products should be conducted, and then also listing them in the CRB, which is like a mainstay of their profession, of their business, they're going to be negatively affected. And that is something that comes from a negative culture. When an SME comes to be known in a negative light, how we know them is they're not very compliant, they're not very data protection sensitive. So if you have priorities as a policymaker, the first thing to go is the person who behaves badly, and that's the person who gets punished the most. I want you to contrast that to the protection, the extra protection that banks are getting. They're not SMEs, but look at the level of protection banks are getting in the time of the COVID-19 pandemic. The approaches from a policy perspective is very different, and I guarantee you it's because of the reputation. If the reputation was more, yes, they're helping people access, financial products at a cheap rate, and then helping people get out of poverty, policymakers would be hesitant to punish them. But now, because of the negative reputation that keeps following them, it's sort of like, how can we get rid of you quietly? That's why for an SME, you have to pay attention to such policies. You have to pay attention to data protection, and then use data protection, your compliance with data protection rules and laws as a marketing edge. So like, market yourself as, we are the people who are compliant to the GDPR, to the Data Protection Act. It will give you a marketing edge.
Okay.
And maybe I can even add on to that. I like the fact that you've Mercy has drilled down that the main issue these online lenders had was actually a data protection issue, right from the start. Because by the time you take somebody's phone book and call their relatives, call their what, and even as other business members today, I'm sure a good number of us are offering our services maybe through an app that receives, and your app by default says, allow access to photos, allow access to phone book records. What are we doing with that? And so even today, when the CBK governor was speaking, earlier today, he had a press conference, and he still took a whole, I think, 2 minutes or more to talk about digital lenders and how they are a small group, a very small part of the lending economy, but they are very, very noisy. And where did the noise come from? It came from the reputational issue of data protection. And that is a it's almost, what can I say, not light bulb moment, where if they had fixed data protection and data privacy, we'd not be seeing the negative effect. But also for SMEs, it's very important to remember the extraterritorial application of some laws in regards to data protection. Fine, you're a small business in Kenya. Are you handling data from somebody else, say in another jurisdiction like the EU? Then of course you become netted by those, you fall under those particular laws and legislation. So it's quite critical and quite important even at this moment. From a cultural perspective, how do you do things on a day-to-day basis?
You just said something about GDPR. And is there any particular difference when you comply to GDPR which is guided on data protection as well, but in EU and the Data Protection Act here in Kenya. As a business owner, or if you're a techie, is there any difference? If you comply in Kenya, does it mean that the same practices help you protect your business or your department or the organization you work for in Kenya and also in EU? Are there any changes in policy between EU's GDPR and Kenya's Data Protection Act?
So what usually happens is that, as was mentioned earlier, the principles are the same worldwide. Maybe what might be missing in one country or another is one facet or another. So, of course, for many businesses that are GDPR compliant, they already had a head start. But it would be important to do 2 separate audits of your businesses to see in terms of both the Kenya Data Protection Act and even GDPR, to see are there places where maybe there's a gap. You might be fully compliant to Kenyan law, but maybe from a GDPR perspective, you may not be. So, but also some countries, and maybe I hope to see this happening very soon. Some countries have got bilateral agreements or even multilateral agreements whereby where you look at both legislations for data protection in each country, say they look at the Kenyan one, and then they also look at, say, the American one, and say that we've looked at both the laws and we feel that they fit the requisite parameters. And when you do this, as long as you're compliant in Kenya, we can also agree that you're compliant in this other country. You see, even right now, there are negotiations happening in Kenya, between Kenya and the US in terms of free trade agreement. I hope these are some of the discussions that we can start seeing to happen. Appreciation of local laws, and actually seeing, can maybe local SMEs be given a break in terms of international compliance, just by analyzing both laws and saying, look, if you're compliant in Kenya, then maybe also compliant in another country. Yes, it happens, but that usually needs a ratification of agreements between both countries.
Okay. With employees working from home, Mercy, examples of, are there any examples that you know of incidences where people are breaching data protection, and what actions can be taken into account to prevent this from happening? And if it has already happened, how can an organization be able to reorganize themselves so that they make sure that they are compliant?
Okay, thank you. So I did a little bit of research just ahead of this session, and I'll address that question, the examples of violations in twofold. And the first is our social media interaction. So if you look at the hashtag work from home, on Instagram, there are 11.9 million posts, with the hashtag work from home. And then on TikTok, there are 2.6 billion views of posts that have the hashtag work from home. So here's what I noticed. And these are all violations. I have actually seen these trends in Kenyan posts, people who work for corporates in Kenya. So the first that I've seen is photos of Zoom calls displaying names, okay? So it may not look like anything at first glance, but that's a data protection issue. So now we know where you work, and we know who you work with, and we know that those people work in that organization. So that's a privacy issue. Then some even take photos, like you take a selfie, you're in a conference, maybe a Zoom conference or a Zoom call with your coworkers, and then you take a photo of the entire screen, with everyone stacked up. So we can see their faces, and then we can see their names, because, sometimes Zoom displays the name, and we can see their preferences. Maybe they have a background of, the beach or something, or even some of them put their family members as a background. So we know their Zoom preferences. Okay, the other one I've seen is people getting deliveries at home. Then, because, it's very fancy, you're taking pictures of the delivery, and the delivery package comes with like the name and the address. So we already know where you live. And then we've seen spouses, is that the right word? Spouses or spouses posting photos of their significant others working from home. And then what they forget to realize is when you're doing a photo or a video of someone, we can see their screen. So if I were to zoom in, I can actually see the document they're working on. And perhaps that's confidential information belonging to a client. I can access the client's confidential information. And then I've seen also photos of, oh, I'm so stressed, I'm working from home. So like you take a photo of, all documents spread out on a table. Again, that's a data privacy issue. And then you're revealing information for marketers without knowing. So like you post photos of, yourself working with dogs at home, or ordering takeout, or drinking a lot, drinking at the job. And these are things we've seen happening. So you're not conscious about it, but you're giving marketers all this information. And then also other people's addresses. You're doing these funny videos about like shouting out to your colleagues, or to your neighbors or something like that, and then a neighbor answers you back, or you video neighbors passing, or you video what's happening on your neighbors end. Still a privacy violation. And then the other thing I've seen that's most concerning is children in Zoom phone calls, and I've seen this even with international leaders who are like working from home, so like you take a photo of, I think we saw this with the Prime Minister of Canada, with his kids. And then people are doing that a lot, like you're in a Zoom call and then you see photos, okay? So you don't realize it, but there are so many violations of the Data Protection Act from just that kind of cavalier like behavior at home, and especially with how children data should be handled and how children should be portrayed even in a digital context. Now, on the other, I said I'll address it like in twofold. So the other perspective is now from the employer's side. So when an employer tells you to work from home, what they don't realize is that short of a consent, like an express consent from the employee, then you are not entitled to me or my space or my person when I'm in a different environment, which is my home. And this is why I'll explain. So at work, that environment is highly curated. So you are seen in a specific light that you as the employee choose to be seen in. So if you want people to look at you seriously, that's how they view you. And that's part of the right to privacy, is the personality rights. I want to be known as serious Mercy, or I want to be known as the joking Mercy. And that's how you're going to know me as. That's part of the right to privacy. At home, I have a million things going on. I have people, perhaps I have kids, perhaps I have my relatives living with me. You're going to see these people in the background. You're going to hear conversations about them. So if I don't consent to it, that attitude from employers that when I call you on Zoom, you better pick up and you better switch on your video, you don't realize that that is an express privacy violation. I'll give you an example. If an employer was to witness maybe a law being broken, maybe a domestic violence situation or something like that, you would be shocked how many privacy issues would arise from the employer trying to intervene from such a situation, because that is a private moment, that is a private setting. And then, so what entitlement is there? Like the pandemic has given employers this entitlement where they feel like they're entitled to your time and to your person while you're at home. But in reality, express consent is necessary for you to even film yourself at home or to even interact with your employer when you are at home. Then there is the issue of health data, because now, whether we like it or not, we're in the middle of a pandemic. And when there's a pandemic, of course, the Public Health Act kicks into play. But remember, the Public Health Act obliges you to report to the state, not to your employer. So some of the things that employers are doing, like forcing people to disclose their status, that is a trap. That is a data protection trap that people really need to be careful about. The other thing is monitoring. So a lot of employers feel like, if I'm going to pay you full due, then I need to know you're working on my document when you say you're working on my document. So they're installing software, for example, to track your movements and your keyboard strokes. but you forget that in a home private setting, the computer, for example, is not just used for company work. You're using it for private purposes. So while at work, you can regulate my conduct in that way, at home, that is a violation of privacy. And for example, when it comes to like the use of resources, for example, at work, you have a work computer, it's connected to a network, there's a firewall. At home, it's a private computer. Probably the security is not as, as proficient as would be at work. At home, people are watching movies. Some of them are watching movies from streaming sites, downloading a lot of malware, and then that is the same computer you're going to use for your work. It's the same computer you're going to use for your work, and then you're exposing your company, you're exposing even your fellow employees to a cybersecurity risk. So some of those things we really need to think through them, and especially the one for social media requires a new education on how to interact with the social media. Like, yes, it's fun to talk about the pandemic, and we all need that general therapy. Like, it's like group therapy for the entire world. We need it by talking about it on social media. But then from a company's perspective, how are you going to protect yourself?
Thank you so much, Marcy. Rosemary, would you like to add any pointers, any case studies that you've seen where employees and both employers are actually breaching the act, and if there's anything that maybe they can do to remedy the situation?
Yeah, so like as has been mentioned, right now it's not something that's only happening in Kenya. It's all over the world. The statistics are, at the moment, we have almost 1.5 billion working remotely. And not a while ago, work from home was a preserve of cool tech companies, and I had the privilege of working for one of those, where you could choose whether to work from the house, work from the office. But even in such times, there'd already been set parameters in regards to, and maybe Mercy Njue, my answer to this question is almost jumping to the next question. Hello?
Okay.
Yeah, it's jumping to the issue of why should data protection be incorporated in organization culture, examples of practices can build this, and how they can measure success. So, and right now, many companies were in culture shock. A number of them didn't even have platforms. Which one can we use? Which one works for us? And then, of course, we now saw guidelines coming up in regards to work from home. And I'll even give you a very funny example. Not about work, but about schoolwork. So the first few weeks of my son going to having online classes, it was almost free for all, trying, seeing what to do. After 2 weeks, the school came up with rules. Like, first and foremost, you must be dressed in a particular way. Or who can speak, how do you manage meetings? So what we're seeing is, even from a company's perspective, we are starting now to see policies coming up in terms of remote work policies, remote work security policies, because how are we protecting our enterprises as people are working away from home? How do we stop somebody from taking a screenshot or a selfie of an office corporate chat or a call? And then, of course, as the first thing that Mercy mentioned was very critical in terms of the Wi-Fi networks and routers at homes. They are more easily compromised than enterprise-grade equipment in offices. So, how are we as businesses moving forward to make sure that we are assisting the people who work for us to protect the data? Then, of course, the issues in terms of bandwidth. Where do your people live? Do they have adequate? From a perspective, fine, you've said that you're not working from home, you're working from the office. Is there like an allowance to make sure that whatever this person needs to actively work, is it there? Or what kind of support is being offered for business to actually be able to be done? And a good example was given by one of my friends who's been working for home for so many years, and his company has been paying him an allowance for the use of office space in his house? Are those considerations that maybe corporations can make? Can an SME really afford that? Is it a thought that's here? And right now, it's about the balance between the work from home, the new realities, and of course, the rights of those you work with. So how are you going to create a good balance to ensure that in as much as now we're stepping on each other's spaces, how are we ensuring? And then, of course, corporate VPNs. Some companies have that. Are they robust? Have you actually created them very well? Do these things create a productivity bottleneck? How are we handling those as businesses? And then, of course, there's increased email exchanges. Well, I think email exchanges and, of course, increased meetings. I miss the days when you could walk to somebody's desk, make a query, and get the answer. Right now, what does that mean from an operational perspective? Are we having video conferencing fatigue? Is that happening? And then, of course, the other issue is other movements now to much more secure spaces like the cloud. What decisions are being made? These are some of the things that businesses are being forced to very quickly move to robust practices. These are robust practices that are being taken up, and these are now being incorporated into corporate culture by force. Before, right in the early stages, we were learning, but right now we'll see many of these moving into actual corporate policies, SME policies, because whether you like it or not, when you're working from home, there's somebody you're serving. You're either serving a client, you're serving one person or the other. So how are we maintaining that work etiquette, and also at the same time ensuring that data protection is a culture? And it's actually a two-way process. It's about the person who works for you, or the person working from home, knowing what their requirements are. And also on the other end, as the SME or the business, are you providing the adequate infrastructure for you to have a proper framework to protect the data of those? So it's actually a double responsibility. Fine, the employee may take a selfie one day, or maybe somebody might do one thing or the other. But have we set aside ground rules? Have we created a policy? Have we informed them? Have we had training on how to work from home? So there has to be a very delicate balance, because whether they like it or not, in remote work, your obligations for data protection are not behind. They still have to be way ahead. And it's not something you can bury your head in the sand and say, oh, no, right now we're not being compliant, or maybe there can be lapses. It's even more greater. We've heard of Zoom bombing and all those other things. So what impact does this have on you from a data protection perspective? And when you take that funny video of something your colleague has done, have you violated their rights? It may look funny to see them in shorts, or maybe to see them and it goes viral, but what happens to the rights of this individual? Those are the considerations from a business perspective.
Okay. Maybe we can talk about some of the things that you guys have raised. For example, a lot of organizations now are moving to cloud since they have to access documents from home. What does that mean when it comes to data protection? What are those things that they need to think about even before they move their employees to the cloud platforms? If they have already moved, what are those things that they need to start reconsidering before they even change vendors? And then the other thing, this is also open to you and Mercy, document sharing. I'm seeing a lot of documents now being sent via WhatsApp. Someone will tell you, oh, don't email, let me just WhatsApp you. What does that mean to data protection and privacy, especially regarding documents that could be too private? Then the other thing is usage of personal devices for work. Personal devices have different amount of data that are for personal use. So how do you protect yourself if you are an employee using a personal device and the organization has not provided you with the infrastructure to enable you to work? Yeah.
Okay. I'll go first, and then Rosemary, you can chime in. With regard to cloud, and I think this is where some confusion comes in. Remember, when you use any cloud platform, whether it's Google or anything else you're using, you're entering into a contractual relationship. So any contractual relationship comes with terms and conditions. And in Google's terms and conditions, they already tell you what data protection practices they have incorporated into their platforms. And they also tell you the applicable law. So the good thing is, with us being late takers of data protection legislation and policy, we are behind the curve. So a lot of the internationally acclaimed companies, their terms and conditions actually, they sort of are even stricter than our data protection law. So there's very little to worry about when it comes to that. So I wouldn't be very concerned about migrating to the cloud. I would just tell you, make sure you read the terms and conditions and see if that's something that works for you. Where the problem is where the SME has full control over data and how they use the data. So for example, if you violated privacy, if for example you acquired information illegally and stored the information in the cloud, forget about Google's intermediary liability. It's still going to be you that's going to be held accountable. So the violations by the SME, that's what you need to watch out for. Your conduct before you even store, or even if you're doing cloud computing, your conduct before, during, and after, that's what you need to be concerned about, not the cloud storage itself. With regard to the last question you asked about, and I see also someone has asked that question, like if an employer is forcing you to use a browser that takes photos, and yeah, it's true, you've brought in the crux of the matter is this, like personal computers are personal computers. They have other uses. There are other things you use the computer for, such that if I was in the process of doing something personal and you took a screenshot, that would be a violation of my privacy. So the problem with employer-employee relationships, especially during a pandemic, is you're afraid that if you protest, then you're going to lose your job. But if you're really concerned about your privacy, and if, for example, there's no way to adapt to what your employer wants, which really shouldn't be your place. It should be there for them to adapt. It shouldn't be for you to accept their bad practices. What I would do from a personal perspective is to write a protest letter to the employer, and I would tell them for the following reasons, being that this is a personal computer. So if the company does not provide a work computer for me to use remotely, then they shouldn't monitor what I'm doing with my personal computer. That would be the stance. And that's something that even if we were to go to court, that would be upheld. The problem we currently have is that we don't have a data protection commissioner that you can complain about about these things. If we had a DPC, these are things you just alert him of and say, this company is forcing us to do this, and they're tracking our keystrokes, and they're taking videos without our consent, and then the DPC would be able to stop that practice start. When it comes to litigation and even like asking the court to intervene, it's a very tedious process and it's costly. You might lose your job in the process, and then when you look at it, you wonder whether it's worth the time. But I would do a protest to the employer, and if there would be any repercussions, because you see that is something you're doing pursuant to your constitutional right, so you shouldn't be punished for it. If there's any drawback from it, then you see at least you're protected from an employment law perspective. But please don't take those things lying down, because remember, employers are also business people. So in as much as they're collecting data to make sure you're working, they're also collecting marketing data for themselves, and also to see how they can leverage on what you're doing for the next level. I wouldn't be shocked if now a lot of the employers decide, going forward, let's all work remotely. I'll just monitor you using this and this kind of software. So don't take it lying down. I would demand for work computer, and if I fall into trouble, employment trouble, then at least from an employment perspective, the employment court acts quickly and you're always protected. Like, you can't just get fired because you are standing up for your rights, as opposed to trying to go to court to stop your employer from doing that kind of practice. I personally don't know any software that would stop the employer from doing this. I'm sure they exist, because Kenyan employers are not original. I'm sure they're doing things other people have done elsewhere.
Rosemary, would you like to add?
Yes. So in terms of cloud computing, I think for me, the biggest lesson has been in terms of what have we lost as a country from being a late entrant into uh, cloud computing and remote working. I remember the first few weeks of the pandemic, there was paralysis. And here I'll go off the SME, I'll go to maybe government relations and even government offices. Like for some time, there was almost like a freeze. You were not getting services, everybody was afraid, everybody went back home. But there are countries which have had cloud fast policies. And what these have enabled them was to be able to offer services not from the servers that are located somewhere, but people are able to work from different areas. So maybe even in our minds right now, we need to be rethinking, do we need to have a further appreciation of cloud technology? And in terms of offices, we're now seeing companies purchasing software that protects their data even more than before. I'll give an example of now, in some instances, like even things like there's software that even for Word documents, you can tell, you can see who has access, who has read. There can even be a blocker for who it can be sent to. In some instances, it may be understandable in terms of actually securing the information of the corporation or even securing information regarding the particular practice that you're in. So these are things that are coming up. We'll see more and more of this. And that's what I kept saying. There'll be a compromise between the person working remotely and the organization that they work for to make sure that the rights of both are maintained. Because again, from a litigation perspective, the actions of an employee working remotely can be a litigation risk to a company. So, and that's why we find sometimes very extreme knee-jerk reactions, not to defend extreme actions like monitoring keystrokes and taking screenshots. I think, but we'll also realize that there'll be a lot of trust that's going to be built with time. A long time ago, when somebody had seen you by your desk and you don't pick up your call, there was a lot of trust that, he must be busy doing something else. When you don't pick up your call when you're at home, somebody imagines that this person is just Netflix and chilling. So we're going to have to develop different parameters. How do we even gauge what work has been done? We'll even have to be even more stringent on work hours. I realized from a personal experience, the first few weeks of work from home, there was, you didn't know when to stop. You continued. And there's even been analytics in some companies where they realize that people are actually doing much more crazy hours. You know, that break that used to happen from when you wake up, you leave, have your commute, go to the office, and then now when you leave the office, you actually close your laptop and come home. So right now, what we're seeing, even from a social perspective, we have blurred lines regarding when to work, when not to work, when to stop working, and especially, and I'm usually when it's a full male panel, it's a manel. So I think today we have a womanel. A number of us may be mothers or even other people who've come in. You realize that at some point there was no break. You continued. So maybe in terms of policy development as SMEs, are we going to start saying that as a rule, say from 5 p.m., we don't expect, say, video work conferences. As a rule, we don't expect people to be doing certain things at certain times. Because when people worked in a set workplace, those rules were already there right from by design. But now, what new measures are we going to take to make sure that you're actually protecting your workforce from literal overworking and burnout while they're working from home? That's all I can add to this conversation.
That's very informative.
Sorry, Mercy, before we move forward, I think also, I don't mean to say that there's no solution. Let me just be clear about that. That we don't have a data protection commissioner doesn't mean that we are hopeless. And I see also in the question someone has asked about whether someone can go to CAJ, that is the Office of the Ombudsman. Unfortunately, the Office of Ombudsman oversees public institutions. So for example, if the data protection commissioner had done something bad, then you can report him to CAJ, to the ombudsman. Unless you're working for a government office, then the CAJ route is not really open to you like that. However, there are other routes. For example, the Communication Authority also issues guidelines on how technology should be utilized. And that's one way you can, do an intervention for yourself by reporting this kind of practices to the Communication Authority. Yes, and then in the employment world, there's also a labor officer in every ward, in every district. There's a labor officer, and these are things you can report to the labor officer, and they would be able to carry out an intervention for you, maybe even obtain a court order for you to stop being that's just surveillance on another level. But yes, I would try with the Communication Authority, definitely, even if for them to issue guidelines on how employers should interact with employees during this period. Yeah. If it's a government office, definitely feel free to report them to the Office of the Ombudsman. Yeah, absolutely.
And from a law and development perspective, you can actually write a memorandum, though there's no bill or anything like that. You can actually write a concept note to lawmakers saying that this is the new normal, this is what has happened. Maybe we need an amendment of the Employment Act to protect, or even regulations under the Employment Act for remote working. You see, this is development of laws, things we never imagined before. I think before the Employment Act was written for brick and mortar, what new legislations can we derive based from online work? Is there a time now for us to review and see how engagements can be defined so that to protect all parties?
Thank you for that. So the next question is about organization culture. How can organizations incorporate data protection as part of their organization culture? And are there any practices that they can help build this, and how would they be able to measure success of that?
So the funny thing with data protection is, if you don't have it in your bloodstream, you're not going to do it. There's nothing like, let's build a product, and then at the end, let's see how we're going to incorporate data protection. If you don't start by privacy by design, then you've lost the plot. So if you're going to have a data protection culture, it has to start from the grassroots. And this is what my advice to SMEs, and really anyone who doesn't have to be an SME, would be, is to break down all your processes and then start from the beginning. From the first point of interaction with a customer, think about it that way. Like, what data protection rules apply at that point? What should we do? And then incorporate it into the last man in the organization. So for example, even if it's a secretary, we've seen a lot of bad data protection practices, even from the front desk, yeah? And that's because people have understood data protection to be a legal issue. So the lawyer's office in the organization, they understand data protection completely, 100%. They can give you a good legal opinion. But the secretary is busy taking photos of documents and sharing them on Twitter and sharing them on WhatsApp groups, and then those documents go viral. So it's something that has to be very organic, and it has to grow. How, for example, employers treat employee time, like in a physical context. So for example, if you work in an organization where you have to leave your biometrics to enter the building, that culture, nobody really tells you why you need to do it, but everybody knows that I need to carry my badge and I need to leave my biometrics, otherwise I will not get access to this building. It's something that is so internalized, like nobody needs to tell you about it. And that's how data protection has to be if you're going to take it seriously. That employees, even the cleaner, even interns who come in to work for you, on a transient capacity, they know this is how I am supposed to behave. They don't even need to go into details. They just know it's something that's very inculcated into them. The thing with our unique scenario is there was so much like there's so much fights, on data protection, and a lot of, fights from the government itself, the government not wanting to be under the purview of the Data Protection Act, not wanting to be covered by some of the rules and the policies on data protection. So the attitude people got from it is that data protection is not a good thing. And for SMEs, the messaging that has been persistent, and even for me, like when clients come to me, they tell me this Data Protection Act is going to kill us. And I've realized that the reason why SMEs have that attitude is because of how the framing was done on Data Protection Act. It was done as a punitive thing. It was done as a thing that was supposed to come and curtail your business. And that's really not what it is. It's something that if you play by the book, you can actually really promote your business very well. And you can actually play within the rules. You can play very safely within the rules and still achieve what you're trying to achieve, especially when it comes to issues like consent. The thing with consent is once you get it, it can help you do so many things. You just need to know how to get it and get it according to the rules. I see, like, for example, the question that you've asked about how we can create awareness from the grassroots. And that's just going to be the responsibility of the owners and the CEOs and the heads of these organizations. You have to break everything down first, like I said, and then start again. Like, it has to be from the bottom. Privacy by design or no privacy at all. That's really how it's going to be.
Thank you. Rosemary, do you want to add something?
What she has said, and just to sum it up, is that we all need to have a critical analysis of what our culture is. And actually, there's a particular picture I like. I'm hoping to be able to share this with you. So I don't know if viewers can see. So there's this particular screen.
Yes.
You can see it, yeah?
Yes.
So it's a small boy who says, before I write my name on the blackboard, I'll need to know how you're planning to use my data. And that's the kind of culture that we'll need to, a very basic thing when you're learning how to write. Can you please write your name on the blackboard? So those are things that we'll need to develop right from an early stage. And it's about a critical analysis, the things that you thought were normal. How then do you come up and change that? Yep.
Okay. So there are two questions that I would want us to pick up before we continue. Ken says, I agree with the panelists. Excellence in application and compliance with DP laws might be costly, but it earns trust of consumers. And this is particular to trust-linked services as banking, health. Probably sensitization of consumers and businesses, SMEs, can do more justice in this space, I think. And this is one aspect we may need to invest in as a country. But whose role is it to sensitize Wanjiku? Before you answer that, also, I can see another similar question by Martha. Question, what needs to be done to create awareness of data protection to the grassroots? For instance, guards into buildings, estates, M-Pesa agents, etc. Rosemary, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can start. Laws have a very funny way of changing how we all behave. I think none of us imagined that we'd need a mask before we walk out of our houses, I think about 3 or 4 months ago. Today, regulations are there and you see everyone wearing a mask. So who takes responsibility? Whose role is it? I think it starts from I think you who has knowledge has, in as much as we say legally, ignorance of the law is no defense, but I think those who've got knowledge have got a responsibility towards sharing that knowledge. And it can even be small things as an SME. When you enter a website, you say, this is what you're doing to protect your data. Just from that entrance, you've already taught people a thing or two about data protection, about their principles, and all that. But of course, there'll need to be a lot of capacity building, especially in Mashinani, especially for Wanjiku. There'll need to be a lot. And so in terms of whose role I can't wait for the day even the Office of the Data Commissioner comes up. Hopefully they'll have funding for marketing, for public relations, for information awareness. These are some of the things that can be done from a public affairs perspective. So we look forward to even, and it's even in the small things. You notice that in many websites you subscribe to, you got a message saying that we have reviewed our terms and conditions. Kindly click. Did any of us bother reading? And I'm sure many of us quickly click accept. Even the cookie messages in websites, these have since been updated. They are much longer, or even if not much longer, they are made much easier to understand. But we don't take that chance of trying to. It's gonna be everybody's responsibility. It's a new culture. It's a new normal. Before technology came and there was rapid sharing of information, we did need data protection regulation because of how we behaved, or rather because of how systems were set back then. If something was in a file locked up in an office somewhere, chances of access or leak of that data was very simple. Maybe a secretary or receptionist or a person who actually handles the data. Right now in cyberspace, it's much more different. Things are more fluid. And in more fluid situations, we develop laws to sort of protect ourselves more. So yeah, it's quite a challenge. We're all gonna, we'll all have to take one for the team. Anybody who's attended this seminar will have to work hard to make sure that we pass this knowledge forward.
Mercy?
I agree 100% actually with what Rosemary is saying. Only to just challenge you, I believe maybe a couple of us or the attendees are maybe SME owners or business owners, and money talks, full stop. Money talks. And when money is involved and when institutions have money either to gain or to lose, you see things shifting very quickly. Right now, the data protection conversation has been going on for many years, and up to now, even the biggest telcos in Kenya will not have a dedicated, let's say, data protection conversation because they know you're not taking it seriously. But if someone was to stand to lose, like a quantifiable sum of money, as in it's going to change things very quickly. And this is the space for SMEs. How about you design products that help people, check for data protection compliance or something like that? How about you design products that the competitive edge is really the data protection compliance itself? So it's also a very interesting space because it's an opportunity for investment and we are squandering it away. Like we waste it complaining about the role of government and how the government is not doing enough and how the DPC's office has not come to be. But even for ICT for development organizations, this is your space. Now the law has already passed. This is what you're supposed to be doing. You can create value out of just educating people on data protection or creating competitive products that people can now start taking up. Or even just add-on products. You don't have to create a product from the ground up. It could be an add-on that elevates your security levels or something like that, or your data protection security. It's really an exciting time and we should not waste it complaining about what the government has or has not done or whether people know about data protection or not. If I was in that space, and I really am in that space, I would be an early taker and I would actually keep quiet about how people don't have information and capitalize on that and say, this is my space and this is now where I make my money. This is how I'm going to make myself, known to everybody. I am going to be the data protection champion and make money in the process. So there's really also an opportunity, if you want to look at it better, there's an opportunity to make money off ignorance, so to say.
And there's an interesting question, I think I saw. Should we take note of the sins of people right now before the data protection commission is appointed? Yes, go right ahead. Yeah, because when the law came into force in November last year, so anybody before then, there's really no excuse to. There's absolutely no excuse for not complying with the law right now.
Okay, so the other question is, why should compliance matter now? Now that more organizations are prone to cyber attacks and more citizens are more careful about who they give their data. I mean, these days, if you send me a link and the first thing it says, it's compulsory to send in my I need to sign up or I need to give up my cookies, I close. So why is it important? Why should compliance matter?
For that exact reason, Mercy, that people won't take up your products, it should be a motivation for compliance, because there is also a niche part of the population that, is growing up knowing about data protection. And trust you me, they're not going to be blind followers like our generation and below. We are the people who know, I'm very interested in this product. Let me just give up all my, security settings and see what, then I can come back and reverse, the harm they've done. No, there's a population that just won't mess with you if you're not careful. But then also there's, to play devil's advocate, there's also a very nonchalant attitude towards privacy. For example, if you're following the US politics, there's been an ongoing fight against TikTok. They say TikTok privacy settings and practices are not up to code with the American system. It's a Chinese-owned company. They're doing a lot of illegal data harvesting. But who cares? TikTok has become the most popular platform overnight. It's almost like the more you tell people these people are not respecting your privacy, the more they're like, oh, you mean? Let me join them. So there's also that other angle to it. But remember, you are a business. You're not representing yourself. And for me, the opportunity cost, the motivation for compliance is you are going to lose so much money. You are going to be fined and you could close down. That is just the bottom line. The question you asked earlier about GDPR, whether GDPR is different from the Kenyan Data Protection Act. And this is where SMEs that are dealing with data subjects in EU, they don't have to be from the EU. They don't have to be people who are resident in the EU. They just need to be in the EU. When you're processing their data, and should you fail to comply to the level of GDPR, not just general, data protection rules, but GDPR itself, the amount of fines we are seeing coming from the EU could really strangle you. Kenya might be, a bit nezaongea, and then also you could be slapped with a warning or something like that. But GDPR could strangle you as an SME, and that could be the end of you. That is, for me, that's the motivation. Money still is the motivation.
And then maybe what I can even do at some point, not even at some point, right now, is to highlight the fines that have been there. The Facebook was fined 5 billion Kenya shillings for the Cambridge Analytica scandal. That's about 500,000 US, 500,000 pounds. British Airways was fined an equivalent of 20.87 billion Kenya shillings for a breach or in terms of poor security arrangements. So you as an SME who is serving somebody in the EU, what is your consideration? But even to answer the question of why is compliance important for SMEs, you see, other industries have had a head start. Even when we're analyzing the Data Protection Act, say for banks earlier on, and for other businesses like law firms, you see most of these businesses right in the start, it's a bank, but yes, we still call it a business. Most of these were coming from a point of safety information being hidden, and that was an intrinsic part of their culture. Like it was part and parcel of who they are. Not just every day when you walk to a bank counter, you can see somebody's balance. Not every day when, as in those, some instances even need a court order. So some practices and some industries, right from the get-go, came from a privacy perspective, but not SMEs. We come from a point of where we want people to know about our products. We want people to know other people who are using our products. And you see the whole, and with the internet and with the digital market, there's so many loopholes that we try to exploit in order to win more customers and to even get more, say, money coming to our businesses. So from a compliance perspective, we have to raise our compliance antennas much more than before. Lawyers come from a place, Mercy Sumbi and I, come from a perspective where by the time you're being sworn in as an advocate, you come from a point of swearing secrecy. So some of those from a data protection point of view, right from the get-go, from a cultural perspective, they had it. Banks, the same thing. But now SMEs, what happens? With the increased obligations, what is it that that we're building up as cultures, in terms of our own cultures, to make sure that privacy, they actually call it privacy by design, to make sure that you're incorporating privacy by design in whatever activities that you do.
Wow, that's very informative. William has just talked about Zoom and data protection. It has reminded me of how to communicate when you have been put on the spot. I really liked how Zoom communicated about their data protection issues, and they kept people updated about what they're doing. And I think right now, most people who are using Zoom for enterprise feel more comfortable because of how they handled the situation. So if you are looking for a case study of how you would, if it comes to be that you are on the frying pan, I'll refer you to the Zoom case study. Look at it how they, I think at the beginning of March when everyone was migrating to Zoom and the kind of issues that they had, and how, so I think within 2-3 months, they have regained this trust of so many people who had issues at the very beginning about data protection. So there's also another question here. How can we leverage on the existing cyber laws to support compliance with the Data Protection Act, given that there is a thin line between data privacy and data security, and we have experienced an upsurge of cyber threats in the recent past?
Okay, the sad news is if you're looking for a law-based approach to protect you, very little success is what you're going to get. And I say this because our the Computer Misuse and Cyber Crimes Act, that's our cyber security law. Our Computer Misuse and Cyber Crimes Act does not have a data privacy attitude. It actually has a seed information kind of attitude. If you look at the chapter on, for example, investigation issues, and I'm sure a lot of your organizations will be called upon to do this at some point or the other, we see an attitude where the law is pushing organizations to give as much information as possible, to store information belonging to people, to give information without telling people that they're giving information to the authorities. So the attitude that Parliament had when coming up with the Computer Misuse Act is very different from the attitude it had when coming up with the Data Protection Act. I can tell you for sure that the thing that will complement the Data Protection Act is constitutional petitions on the right to privacy. And this is something we need to be very progressive about and keep pushing the courts about. People are quite panicked as to, we don't have a data protection commissioner as yet, but I always say you don't need a data protection commissioner for your right to privacy to be upheld. Remember, the right to privacy is an Article 31 right, and it exists whether you have the Data Protection Act or not. So even if the Data Protection Commissioner took 10 or 15 years to come, doesn't mean that you don't have your rights to privacy and that you can't enforce them. So what would complement, to answer the question, is more petitions to the Constitutional Court to seek interpretations and to also seek to punish private companies for privacy violations. If you're looking up to the Computer Misuse Act to help you with enforcement of data protection, that might be a challenge because the attitudes in those acts, even the way the offenses such as hacking have been framed, they are successful, but to a point. When it comes to really sophisticated offenses, nowadays no one is just going to hack your computer very straightforward. It's going to be a very calculated way of, a very calculated attack. It's going to be many players. It's going to have a lot of third parties to it. So when it comes to those kind of offenses, and this is really why we went to court about the act, is like, you're offering us protection for something that would have happened 10 years ago. You need to upgrade this act. You need to make sure that the wording protects just the person you're trying to protect the populace from. Yeah, so constitutional petitions, that's the way to go. Like, let's file more constitutional petitions. Even these complaints about employers, eventually that's where they belong. It's a tedious process, but if you have the time and the money, that is where we should push our attention to. And then also just writing to the Communication Authority, asking for guidelines as we wait for the Data Protection Commissioner. Yeah.
And you see, in terms of cybercrime, I keep saying cybercrimes are not new crimes. If it's stealing, people just move from robbing banks physically to stealing from accounts in one or another. If it is information theft, theft is still theft in whatever way it is you look at it. So in terms of cybercrime, I think what you need to do more is just to beef up. It's gonna be there more because cyber criminals will now look at your remote working. That's going to be an opportunity. We talked about how even your Wi-Fi at home is not configured as well as that which is in your office, the security, the firewalls and whatnot. So moving forward, there'll need to be a very clear balance. Cybersecurity is gonna keep being a very, very touchy point, and it's gonna be almost like a clawback of the gains of remote working, if not well handled. But of course, there are platforms that offer solutions.
Okay, as we close, maybe Matthew, you can start by giving us at least 3 takeaways for employers and employees as they work from home.
Okay, so my one takeaway is the human is always the weakest link, and the cybercrime threats you're going to see coming off from like working from home, it's just going to be the human. It's going to be someone who posted a photo on social media to just make fun of working from home, and it led to a breach in the company's security that cost a lot of money to a lot of people. As in, the human is going to be the weakest link. So this is because the pandemic has removed the separation between the person and the personal. You know, now there's no the employee and then it's just one person. This one is an employer, this person is a home buddy, this is the same person. Capacity building needs to change tact. Instead of having conversations from a employee perspective, it's like the ABCs of social media. For example, you have to have that conversation with your employees. You have to sit down with them and tell them, oh, it's very good. I do not oppose to you having a social media account, but these are some of the things that we should do to protect our company. Then the things that you do in an office setting, you have to start inculcating them in the person. The problem we have is that there's usually an IT person, and then that IT person is held in, he's the guy you call. He's not someone you integrate into the office. He's a guy you call, he comes, he does his thing, and he goes. And that's not really helpful because he's not taught anyone anything. He's not taught people data practices. He's told you don't click here and not told you why. So now that guy can't come to your house to help you. You are alone. So if you didn't teach your employees some of these simple things, even like phishing, how can I prevent myself from phishing or something like that? So that's the first thing. Like do a lot of basic cybersecurity training with your employees. Secondly, do basic social media training with your employees. Very, very basic. Don't take it for granted. It's so funny that even in Uhuru's teleconference meetings, there's so much, like the way they post photos on Twitter to sort of like, oh, look, the president is working from home. There's so much you can draw from that. Sometimes documents are open, you zoom in and you just see so much confidential information. You're like, how did they miss that? But you see, when you're taking a photo, it doesn't stick at you that, this document could be, breached or something like that. But if I'm looking at a photo and I can zoom in, I can see so much detail, more than the person who is taking the photo. So do basic social media training. Please do not ignore that. And don't assume that everybody knows how to use social media. And the third thing, and this is not even like a request, is employers have to make an effort to make the home into like a small office. This is what I mean. don't expect your employees to use their personal computers and then expect to monitor those personal computers. Instead, give them a work computer. So if you want them to operate from the cloud, let it be from a work computer where you have control over the security settings, the firewall is up to date and things like that. If it's about an internet connection, you might need to top up to your employees. You might need to top up for them to get a really good internet connection, and to also help them through configuration of security settings. A lot of us survive on even internet that's stolen from our neighbors. So you have to ask these questions of your employees. How can I facilitate you to work in a safe environment and in a secure environment? Do you have a desk, for example? If I have to use my partner's computer, that is already a direct risk to the company. So do you have a computer that you can use at home? Don't just assume and then give people these commands that when I call you, you have to answer. No, don't do anything like that. Just say, like, I'm going to establish an office at your home. And then you'll realize a lot of the assumptions will be blown out of the water, like assuming that every person must be working on a computer 24 hours. Some of those assumptions are going to just float away because of the way remote working is. So this is a good time to reevaluate, like, what are your priorities? Do I really need to, I'm sorry to say this, but do I really need a human resource heavy enterprise, or do I need systems heavy enterprise? This is the time to review those kind of conversations. But then just to warn you, but that you will not get away with just firing people right now. Like, do not rush as an employer. Do not rush to just fire people. That's not it's not lawful. It's not even allowed to just start firing people because of a pandemic. You have to go through the legal process. If you're in a financial hardship, there's a process that you can go through to make a case for why you need to downsize or why you need to let some employees go, but that's not automatic. But anyway, so that is my takeaway. The human weakest link going to fail us consistently. So train that human, and that starts from you. If the boss is already doing questionable things, I mean, how do you expect everyone else to follow back? But yeah, I hope that has been a bit useful.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matthew. Rosemary?
Yeah, so my three issues, the first one, between employers and employees, I think we'll talk about setting boundaries. For me, it's going to be a very key takeaway. We must set boundaries in terms of information sharing. We must set boundaries in regards to data protection. What steps are we all taking? And as Alia mentioned, it will be very key to have work from home policies and work from home security policies, such that our expectations are very clear from each and every individual. The second thing will be to beef up security. And as I said, in terms of security, it's two-way. It's a two-way process. It's both on the employer end and on the employee end. You can't beef up security, say, by moving everything to the cloud, and yet at the most, on the other extreme end, nothing is being done. So beefing up of security will be very critical even for SMEs, because this determines how your operations will be moving forward, and even how well your business secrets will be protected moving forward. And then, of course, my last piece of advice, at this stage, we're all learning. Work from home may be a new normal, we'll all get used to it, but we're still learning. So as a business, it's very critical to have very, they say fail fast, and fail very fast, as in do it right now and do it very quickly, so that you move on to what we see as the next best process for you as a business. So this requires a lot of iteration, a lot of innovation, like seeing what works for you. What works, say, for a medical company won't work for a cosmetics company that sells something else. What works for retail, online retail, won't work for, say, a technology service provider. So it's about iterating and seeing what that works for us. It is going to be a very joint process. So it's going to be a learning curve, though it's been a very steep one. But yeah, those are also good things. And also, and I keep saying, even as citizens, we keep asking ourselves, what are we learning in terms of service provision? Now away from employees and employers, what are we learning in terms of what could have happened. Fine, we had a head start with things like e-citizen and all that, but what more can we adopt from a technology perspective to make sure that services continue, maybe through cloud or something like that?
Okay, thank you so much, Rosemary. Thank you so much, Mercy. I hope the audience has learned something, at least a practice or two, about what to do with data protection when it comes to remote working. We will have a session, a training session on data protection. Follow our social media pages so that you can be informed about when it's next. The recording of this video will be shared on our YouTube channel, so we will post it on social as well. So thank you so much. Also, just to talk about a little bit about Oracle. Oracle has a program called Oracle for Startups. So if you have a technology firm and you would like to know more about if you would like to know more about it, Ellie?
Yes.
Would you like to talk about Oracle for Startups?
Yes, actually, I am going to do that in about 2 minutes because I have a board meeting. Co-host with Mercy today, and I take care of Oracle Strategic Business Development. I'm in this meeting because I also want to and overall we have about 8 in Africa that have joined. So what is Oracle for Startups offering? Oracle for Startups, and you can look them up, www.oracle for Startups, is offering 500 free cloud credits when you join. Once just a minute. Once you join and you've consumed your Oracle Cloud credits, the 500, you will get another 1,000 free cloud credits. What's the biggest thing about this is, unlike our competition, is that we offer local support for any SME that joins the Oracle for Startup program, unlike AWS or Microsoft. So we have on-the-ground support. But most importantly, we take no equity. So we totally take no equity. However, our intention is to make you grow. So if you're looking to grow and scale to enterprise levels, Oracle for Startups is the program you should be looking at. Just recently, we actually acquired one of the startups that had joined Oracle for Startups. The company name is Source Video. So Source Video creates videos that you can use for marketing or internally in your company. And so they were on our platform, they were doing very well, and Oracle was like, oh, this looks interesting. So definitely we bought them up. And that's why I'm saying we take no equity. We could purchase you if it's a viable application that can complement what Oracle already has. So if you are interested in Oracle for Startups, please contact me. I'll put my email on the chart. Even if it's just to have a session, a one-to-one session where I walk you through. So let me do it right now. Contact me. It's ellie.mathenge@oracle.com. Okay. All right. So thank you very much for your time and for listening to me. I look forward to answering any questions or engaging with anyone on email or on phone in regards to our Oracle for Startups program. Mercy, over to you.
Thank you so much, Ellie. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a lovely evening and good night.